Aloha and good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Hart, and I'm the moderator for this session. I want to thank you all for hanging in and enjoying this conference so far. I want to introduce the speakers today for this session, which is the DOTA, Construction Processes, Standards, and Permanent BMPs. As you all have seen before, please use the chat for any questions that you might have, and at the end of the session, we will try to entertain as many of those as we can. I'd like to introduce, we have co-speakers, and I'd like to begin with Ms. Vijaya Tummala. Vijaya is the Senior Project Manager for Environmental Services and Training Center. She has over 16 years of experience in civil, environmental, and water resources engineering. She is a subject matter expert in post-construction best management practices, design, inspection, and maintenance, including low impact development measures. She's managed numerous MS4 planning, construction, design, and compliance projects for programs in the state of Hawaii with the Department of Transportation, as well as the Airports Division. She's a licensed professional engineer, certified erosion and sediment control, and certified inspector of sediment and erosion control. Brian Lum is a senior civil engineer at Environmental Services Training Center. Brian has over 36 years of experience in construction management. He conducts monthly inspections and best management practice measures and devices on various DOTA construction projects to ensure compliance with DOTA Stormwater Management Program, Plan, and MS4 permit. He also provides design reviews and ensures that projects meet the DOTA's erosion and sediment control requirements and permanent BMP requirements. And Brian is going to lead off. Brian, please go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. Can everybody see me? Thank you for joining us this afternoon on this, I guess, final session. Let me share my screen. Okay, yeah, today we're going to cover the updates to the construction progress or procedures. I know that some of you have joined us in previous years. Previous years, about this time in November, we used to hold annual trainings at the airport, at Honolulu International Airport. And it would be like a morning session or all morning training. Well, this is just a follow-up on those trainings. Instead of doing a half-day training session, we decided to just do the updates, let you know what changed from last year's training and the previous year's training. Also, if you're new to the airport's procedures, I do cover some of those items. So to get you more familiar with the processes that you have to follow. Okay, so today we're going to cover the updates to the construction plan, design and review. One of the first things that we did update during this past year is we updated the flow chart. I know it might be a little difficult to see because of the small fonts and everything, but this flow chart can be found at the airport's booth in today's conference, so that might get you a few points. Or if you miss it in the booth, you can also go check the DOTA's website. This flow chart covers everything from start to finish, from design. So this blue section up here is the design. It goes to NTP, followed by the inspection and enforcement, and then finally the project closeout. So it does give you a lot of information, or at least should give you a general guideline of what you have to look out for. So for today, we're covering the design review section. Again, this is just review from last year. The designer submits his design documents, like the drawings and stuff. It goes to REE. REE does the review, or in other words, me or Hart Krauser, another environmental consultant, will be reviewing the drawings and documents. If we have any questions or comments or needs corrections, we send it back to the designer for those corrections, and it repeats the process until everything is accepted by REE. Some projects are considered exempt because of their size or scope. REE will make that determination if the project is exempt from this program. From there, it goes to the notice to proceed, and construction can begin, or the bid process can begin. Okay, just reviewing again some of the design review documents that are required to be submitted. We went over this last year, but just to cover it again, there's a design review checklist for projects that are over an acre, or the notification form for sites disturbing less than 1 acre for those smaller projects. Also, each project has to complete and submit a contaminated soil and groundwater review form, and I'll go into a little bit more detail a little bit later in this program. They also have to submit their project drawings and specs. We can take the drawings as early as 60% submittal or 90%. Anywhere between 60 and 90% submittal would be good. Finally, if the project is over an acre, we review your NOIC, which is the notice of intent for discharges of stormwaters associated with construction activities. Okay. Also, if the project is expected to do some hydro testing or dewatering, we will review the NOIF or the NOIG, and that's only if it's applicable to the project scope. Finally, for larger projects, we also review the SWMPP, which has to be submitted with the NOIC or be part of the NOIC that goes to Department of Health. Or for smaller projects, we review the site-specific BMP plan. Airports has a discharge permit that has to be completed by both the designer and now the contractor. And I'll go again into that a little bit later in this program of those requirements, and the construction asbestos review form. Again, that's just for finding out if there's going to be contamination or potential contaminated materials on the project site. Okay, and then finally, other documents like your anticipated design bid construct schedule, or if you have an underground injection control permit. Yeah. Okay, new to this year, or what's been recently been added to a lot of the design contracts, is that designers are now required to do a phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessment, or ESA. Basically for the phase 1, if the designer submits that contaminated soil and groundwater review form and the construction asbestos review form, that is part of the phase 1 investigation. Those forms go to ARE. ARE checks out the history of the site and will let the designer know if there was any known contaminants. However, if there is no phase 1 ESA for that area, or there's no known mapped contaminated areas, or no current site-specific long-term EHMP, the designer will need to complete a phase 1 for the project. Now, just to go over this, no previous phase 1 ESA. The Department of Transportation, ARE department is in the process of completing phase 1 ESAs for all airports statewide. However, it is not complete at this time. They're in the process. So hopefully when your project comes up, that would be completed. If not, you would have to do it. But in the future, in the near future, hopefully that would be available to all designers and projects. Okay, other things. Okay, depending on what is found on the phase 1 ESA, a phase 2 ESA will need to be prepared or drafted, and that you can coordinate through ARE and DOH, Department of Health, for guidance and determination of exactly what needs to be put in there. That's why I work closely with ARE on this one, and everything has to go to DOH. So eventually you should follow DOH guidelines. One question has been coming up regarding geotechnical borings. If you could use part of the phase 2 ESA from previous experiences, if the borings can be done in accordance to Department of Health requirements as far as sampling and spacing, it can be used, but like again, I said, it has to be within the DOH requirements. Okay, another development, if you do a phase 2 and there is contamination, you would have to come up with a construction EHMP, which is Environmental Health Management Plan. That's just basically telling the contractor, instructing the contractor what measures they need to take when dealing with the contamination. Now, the DOTA does have a programmatic EMP for for all state airports. It's to be used for all state airports. It's an overall guidelines of what to do when encountering contaminated soil, groundwater, vapors, and such items as that. However, if the site does have a site-specific EHMP, then that could also be used in the development of your construction EHMP. If you're involved, or if you watched one of the earlier sessions today where Department of Health talked about contaminated soil, they did cover some of this construction EHMP, where they came up with a new template. And I know the Department of Health did mention it. It's on their website. It says you amend the existing programmatic EHMP, which Department of Transportation has, or like I said, if there is already a specified EHMP, you can also use that one. But the Department of Health does have that template available for your use. Okay, finally, new requirement is if the contaminated materials are to remain on the site after the completion of construction, then a long-term EHMP must be developed by the designer. Okay, new development. Okay, we had a lot of questions. We review site-specific BMP plans that is submitted to us. What has happened since the last training is Hart Krauser. I'm not sure if some of you are not familiar with them, but they're another environmental consultant for the Department of Transportation airports. They handle all the airports on the neighbor islands and some of the airports over here. The only airports they do not manage is OGG, which is Kahului Airport, and Honolulu International. That's handled by my company, Enviro Services. But Hart Krauser did develop a template for a site-specific BMP plan that is available for your use. Here's a little look at the cover sheet and first page. Basically, you just fill in the blanks, put in the information as it pertains to your project. So it makes it a lot easier. It also makes it a lot easier for the review process. So we'll make it's time savings. Okay. In the long term, the Hart Krauser again is developing a SWMPP, stormwater pollution prevention plan. These are for projects that are over an acre that can be used when you submit your NOIC to Department of Health. But again, that's coming soon. It's in development. We'll let you know when that is finalized and ready for publication. Okay, the discharge permit. This year, or this past year, we did make changes to the discharge permit again. I know we covered it in last year's training, but we added a few items. So again, last year, it was called the Permit to Discharge into State Airports Drainage System Related to Construction Projects. Very long title, and it was found to be a little confusing to some people who are reviewing it, or using it, should I say. You remember it was one page, basically, and the last one was revision number 4, dated August of last year. Well, that's out. That's no longer in use. A new permit was developed. It's 2 pages, and there is a major change on it. Right now, it's called the Construction, Connection, Discharge, and Surface Runoff Permit. It's version 5, and again, it was just released this past year. Again, 2 pages. The first page is pretty straightforward. It's filled out by the designer. It's basically the same questions that was on the older version of the discharge permit. You know, what kind of runoff are you expecting? Stormwater runoff from construction site, or if you have a new drainage connection, or you're removing drainage, or if you're doing construction dewatering or hydro testing. It's self-explanatory, check the boxes, and it tells you what you need to submit. And of course, you have your area where you have to sign it and date it. Okay. The major change on this form is there is now an area where the contractor has to fill in, and they are also required to sign. The reason being is a lot of the terms and conditions on the permit pertain to the contractor's activities. So if it was felt that the contractor also needs to be aware of that. Again, these boxes have to be checked off if applicable, but basically the contractor will have to submit a site-specific BMP plan before this permit is executed by DOTA. Okay, another thing that we did this year is, and this is from comments that we received from everybody, is that we updated the DOTA webpage. Like I said, right now we're updating a lot of the forms, we're adding new forms. So if you go to the new webpage, or the existing webpage, should I say, it's been revised to give you labels of which forms are new and which forms are revised. So on this screenshot, you can kind of see the revised forms are highlighted in yellow, and down here on the very bottom is the new label, and it's for this one is for that template for the site-specific BMP plan. This web page will be updated every 6 to a year. So, you know, something that's marked revised now, 6 months from now, it might no longer be revised because it's in use and been there for a while. So I advise all designers and contractors to review this page annually, see what changes were made, and that way they can have the most up-to-date information. Okay, spec sections. We covered these last year. There are 3 sections that we covered last year: 1560, which is environmental controls; 1561, which is the construction runoff control program; and 1562, which is for contaminated media. All 3, and I want to stress this, all 3 sections must be included in all DOTA construction contracts. The reason being is that all 3 are referenced to each other. Like 1561 might reference some of the terms and conditions that is listed in 1560, and vice versa. You might say, well, my contract is only a building, you know, we're not doing any ground disturbance. Well, if you're not doing any ground disturbance, you might have a staging area that is located outside. So maybe then you would need to be aware of the construction runoff control program, which covers your staging area outside. Same way for contaminated media. It covers vapors. Maybe you're working in a building, but all of a sudden you notice vapors or smell vapors. Then some of the terms and conditions of this section 1562 might apply. So that's why we stress that all 3 sections should be included in all construction contracts. Okay, and make sure you have the latest version. The latest version, just contact your state airports engineer or project manager. He has access to the library, and each of the latest sections are included in the library. Okay, going over some of the changes to these sections. 1560, the environmental controls. Last year we covered it. It was 2 different versions. It just depended upon your funding for that particular project. So if your project was federally funded, it had one version. And if it was non-federally funded, it had a different version. Well, the change that we made this year is we got rid of the 2 different versions. Now there's only one version for 1560. So it made it a lot easier. Just make sure that the version date or the current version date is dated August 28, 2020. Okay, 1561. Last year we went over this one. It included Appendix A, where you have to physically include a copy of the construction activity BMP field manual into the spec section. That manual is like 100 pages, 150 pages, so it took up a lot of room. So instead, we deleted that, and now The appendix just references the web address. But be aware, this manual is updated or reviewed for changes every year. So make sure that if your project is a long-term project, say it's going to last a few years, that you're aware of which version of the manual is current for your project that you're doing. The latest version is dated March 1st, 2020. Some of the highlights for 1561 that we just wanted to bring up today is the BMP inspection schedules or requirements. There is always the initial BMP inspections. We're required to do initial BMP inspections prior to any earth disturbing activities. You're allowed to install the BMPs, so you're allowed to disturb the soil in order to install the BMPs, but no other construction activities should start until the initial BMP inspection is conducted and all deficiencies that are noted in that inspection are corrected. We have the monthly BMP inspections or the third party. Some of you who are aware of me know that I conduct the third party BMP inspections for DOTA at Honolulu and OGG, and I know Hart Krauser does it for all the other airports. These monthly inspections are more for projects that are greater than 1 acre, but some projects that are less than an acre do receive monthly BMP inspections, just depending upon the scope of the work of the project. Say, for example, if the project consists of removing an underground storage tank, then pretty much you're going to get monthly BMP inspections on that. Okay, and then finally, there is the final BMP inspections where the site has been permanently stabilized, but do not remove your temporary BMP measures until we do the final BMP inspection. After we do the final BMP inspections, we will, or REE will let you know that all the temporary measures can then be removed. Another thing that is included in 1561 is liquidated damages for non-compliance of the environmental requirements. That you can review, but there is penalties if you don't fix or correct a deficiency within a certain time period, or there's a illicit discharge. You can review the appendix to get a detailed listing of the penalties and the scope of the deficiencies of non-compliance. And then finally, what we want to point out is the bottom one, the annual, and I repeat, annual construction BMP training requirements for all contractors and their subcontractors. I know we do check to make sure that all contractors and their subs have performed the annual training at the beginning of the project, but if the project is longer than a year, this is a reminder that they also needed to do it on the follow-up years. Also, this training does apply to engineers and CMs, so make sure that you guys are also taking the required training or watching the video. There is a test or a quiz that comes along with it, and that kind of tells us that you completed the training. And this last statement here, we wanted to point out, DOT webpage is, well, the training is located on a DOT webpage for construction. There is a DOTA webpage for tenants, and they do have their separate training video to watch. We just want to make sure that you are watching the one that's on the construction webpage and not the tenant. We have had instances where the contractor did do the tenant training instead of the construction training. Finally, section 1562, their modifications or the changes that were made to that section was primarily due to Department of Health updating the procedures and protocols. So we wanted to reflect those changes or updates in our spec sections. So that spec section does now include those current updates. Department of Health, I know they're in the process of even doing more updates to their procedures. So there will be future changes on this one. Another thing, and this is what I like about it. Last year, I asked you for feedback. I know we just introduced a lot of these spec sections last year, and we asked if the construction managers or the engineers, if they were running into some problems with the wording and such, let us know. And we did get some feedback. This one is from a Maui project where there was some comments regarding the OSHA requirements that was included in that spec sections. So we did do some adjusting to the wording. But yeah, if anybody feels that there is problems with the wording or contents, please let us know and we'll consider it and update it as needed. And for this one, the latest version is dated October 2020, but it was just released like about 2 weeks ago. So this is very brand new. Okay. Okay, some of the highlights of 1562 is just a reminder that if you encounter contaminated material or asbestos conduit, to immediately notify the CM, engineer, RE, and the HERE office, especially if it's like groundwater contamination or soil contamination. Also, it does reference the Department of Transportation Airports Programmatic EHMP. And finally, there is some reminders about spill notifications. We just want to point out that all spills gotta be notified to or communicated to the airport manager or their dispatcher. I know different airports have different terminology for this person. Honolulu, it's called code 22. I think Maui is called the dispatcher. You know, Hilo might be called something else, ramp control. But make sure you know who this person is that you have to notify. It's just so that if there is a danger to public health and or to aircraft, they have to be notified right away so that they can take the appropriate actions. And then again, RE and the engineer has to be notified. Also, just a reminder again, if you attended today's meeting or today's session by Department of Health, they kind of reminded you too that HERE office has to be notified for, they call it spills of quantity, or yeah, so you got to watch out for if it's more than 25 gallons. Again, also if it enters the MS4, which is the drainage system or receiving waters, Clean Water Branch should also be notified. And finally, there is a DOTA spill reporting sheet. This can be found on the website. We need that reporting sheet also to be filled out. This is in addition to the HERE office. When you report a spill to the HERE office, they will assign it what they call a release number, and they're going to require certain information from you. They have their own form that they need filled out. That has to be completed, but also DOTA does have a separate form. So make sure both forms are filled out. Okay, so those are what I just discussed is currently in effect. Those are the changes or updates that we made, but there are future changes that are coming that we are already aware of. One of it is, and this should be coming within the next year, is a new asset management software. It's called VEOCI. You're going to start hearing that word a lot. It's just a new program that we can use, and it will hopefully streamline the entire process of design review and construction inspections. So some of the highlights that's coming up is your design review documents, like your project drawing specs, you know, the notification form, the discharge permit. All of that can be submitted through VEOCI. Right now, I think what you're doing is sending an email to your state project manager, and he's forwarding it on to all the other people. Well, instead, now you can just download it to VEOCI and everybody can access it from there. Also, some of the forms will allow you to fill it out electronically, like the discharge permit. It won't be the form itself. It'll just ask you a bunch of questions. You check off those questions and it'll generate the permit. And then another thing that will be on VEOCI is that it will contain all the information as far as contaminated media. You know, what locations. It will show you a map of where the contaminated media was found, maybe some of the histories. Basically like the phase 1 ESA that I told you that is currently under development. So we hope to have that information contained in VEOCI for everybody to access. As far as the construction inspections, it's just to streamline the entire process. We're going to be putting our construction reports in there. I mean, our inspection reports in there. We'll generate the reports for the contractor and the CM, and we'll pull it out from there. Okay. So that's coming up hopefully within the next 6 months to a year. Okay. And finally, I want to turn it over for Josh. She's going to talk to you about some updates in the permanent BMP that's upcoming. Okay, thank you. Vijaya, you want to take it over?
Thank you, Brian. I am sharing my screen right now. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brian, for the presentation. Thank you, everyone, for attending this con today. So I'm going to try and move through it as soon as possible. And then we'll hopefully have some time at the end of the presentation to have questions. So as Brian mentioned, there are actually going back, as Brian mentioned, there are a lot of changes that are happening to the construction program. Since I'm not sure if you're all aware, Stacy Paquette has been leading the Airport Environmental Group, also known as the Air EE, for a few years now. And we've been trying to improve the construction program and making all the necessary changes in the swamp. And that also translates that we are making a lot of changes and or thinking about a lot of changes in the permanent best management practices program. And this presentation will go into that portion of it. Do you guys see my slides changing?
We are not, Vijaya.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
So the agenda for today is I'll go briefly talk about the current process, what the current permanent BMP program process is, and then we'll talk about the, share some highlights of what's upcoming with both the PBMP program as well as the asset management system. So for the current BMP program, I'm going to throw out some key terms I just included in this slide here, but basically it's the same terms that we've been talking about all day. If you've seen Richard's presentation or anybody else's, we use post-construction, permanent BMP, PBMP, it's all the same terms. So this is just a reminder. This is a definition slide that I included only because this is like, so if you're going to start PBMP, what is a PBMP, right? So this is the definition that we have in our SWMP currently. So PBMP is defined as a BMP designed to improve water quality after construction is completed, and subcategories include LID, source control, and treatment control. And there is a definition of LID which pretty much mimics what our permit asks us to do, and it's mostly the philosophy of LID and not really the LID BMP, which I'm going to talk about in future slides. So PBMPs, DOTA SWMP states that PBMPs will be considered for the new development and redevelopment projects under two criteria, which you know, all our previous, if you've attended the previous presentations, one of the Richard basically said the same thing. Highways has the same criteria, and I believe the city has the same. So any project that disturbs an area over an acre, the PBMPs are required to be considered and implemented. And there are certain projects that are less than an acre that could be maybe implement post-construction BMPs. And these projects include steep earthen slopes, including a grade of 20% or more, uncontained wash areas of aircraft, vehicles, and equipment, fueling areas meeting the SPCC criteria for oil storage greater than 1,320 gallons, and if you're installing or modifying or retrofitting the existing MS4 drainage structures. At Honolulu, retrofits can be assessed as the qualifying projects for permanent BMP consideration. This is a flowchart from our Honolulu Swamp Section D, which details the permanent BMP requirements. So the first item that you have to consider is whether or not your project is exempt. And you basically, if your project is exempt, you're not going to do anything, but if it's not, then you decide whether or not if you're going to do an acre or more or less than an acre. And then on each of those, you will determine whether or not your project will implement post-construction BMPs. So this is the actual design process for how, once you determine that your project requires PBMPs, the process that you're going to flow through. So the first step is to identify pollutants of concern from your proposed project. Then you would select BMPs that actually target the identified pollutants of concern. And then you're going to use DOTA's sizing criteria, which is both volume-based and flow-based, similar to the cities. And then last but not the least, develop a O&M plan for each proposed BMP. Evaluating the required O&M for a PBMP assists AREE with planning, inspection, and maintenance of these installed PBMPs. So it's very important for us, and then we'll discuss all of these in the next few slides. So this is a graphic, sorry. So how to identify pollutants of concern? Here are some ways. So you can look at the land use type of your existing project site, historical pollutants that Brian talked about that might be available in GIS soon. Planned activities, what are you doing at the site, planned site design, any special and MS4 and PDS permit requirements. For example, Honolulu has a trash reduction plan, so trash could be a consideration for all Honolulu PBMPs. And then again, last but not the least, receiving water quality impairments. Typical pollutants of concern for projects at DOTA include sediment, trash, nutrients, oil and grease, metals, pesticides, etc. For example, if you're planning a project in Honolulu and your receiving water is Keiki Lagoon, you would have to consider trash, bacteria, nutrients, sediment, and chlorophyll A. So your PBMP selection process would have to include those minimum pollutants of concern. And that will change with different airports. So you would have to look at your specific receiving waters to identify those for your specific project. So this, in a nutshell, is how the PBMP selection process or has to go. This is how it's laid out in the current SWAMP Section D, very similar to the city and county and highways as well. So the focus or the emphasis is to implement LID first, and then followed by source control, and then followed by treatment control. So this is another chart or table that is provided in the SWAMP section that helps you in the selection of the PBMPs. This is based on the different pollutant types, and then you can select your PBMP based on that. I'm gonna pretty much skip through this slide because this is the sizing criteria is very similar to what the city and county follows and what the Department of Transportation Highways Division follows as well. So this is the same. If you're going to do a volume-based design, you're going to capture the 1-inch rainfall over the entire drainage area, and then you're going to size your BMPs based on that. And if you're going to do a flow-based, you're going to go with the 0.4 inch per hour flow treatment. So as Brian went into detail on how the AREE review process goes, what I wanted to focus in this presentation was how what aspects of PBMP should be included in those in the design review documents that Brian was talking about. So make sure that the design phase, your project review package includes drawing specifications as well as the O&M plan, preliminary O&M plan. And then, like Brian said, any comments that are received by AREE have to be addressed so you can finalize your drawings and specifications. During the construction phase, for all the PBMPs, the contractor has to submit shop drawings and any PBMP design changes, specific design changes to AREE for review. This would, for example, these would include, like, if a contractor is implementing, has bid on a manufactured treatment device and then decided to go over one brand of manufactured treatment device over the other, then he would have to provide that. So then basically he would have to resubmit the entire package for the PBMP design review at that point. So then AREE can review again and make sure that the BMPs are meeting the design criteria. And then finally, we want the contractor to provide a PBMP O&M plan, whether it's a standardized O&M plan that we have, the DOTA has developed for the generic PBMPs, or if it's a manufacturer treatment device, then the specific O&M plan from the manufacturer. The next step is once you are built your PBMPs, there's supposed to be a relief of maintenance process. And so during that process, we would like the contractor to notify AirEE when that process is occurring, when that relief of maintenance or turnover is happening. During that process, sometimes it's, if you can, we would request the as-built drawings so that AirEE can start tracking and maintaining these PBMPs and figuring out where the locations are. We would like to request the contractor to ask for an environmental identification number so that AirEE can paint those numbers on the PBMPs as they're installed. Specifically, if they're like a manufactured treatment devices, then we can paint the numbers on them. And then once they're during the relief, the turnover or relief of maintenance, we will verify the installation and location of these PBMPs. So here are some examples of LID implementation and or PBMP implementation at the airports. The photograph on the left is a permeable pavement and the photograph on the right shows the bioswale. Actually, both of them show both if you just have to see them. And these are at the Elliott Street parking lot at Honolulu. The city and county of Honolulu actually has a really good video in today's conference if you want to add it to your swag bag and email it to yourself. It goes into details about what are the different PBMPs, the types, the operation and maintenance requirements, and everything. It's a really good video, and I encourage you to add that to your swag bag and email it to yourself. This is another example of an LID, a bioswale at the Mokulele Airlines facility that was built like 2 years ago. Here are some examples of treatment control BMPs that are installed at the airports. The photograph on the left is a detention pond at Maui or Kahului Airport, and the photograph on the right is an evaporation pond at the Kahului Airport as well. The other examples that are shown in this slide are retrofits or manufactured treatment devices. One of the most typical units that we see all the time is a CDS unit, which is the left two photos on the bottom. And then we have also installed a drain inlet insert at the Honolulu Maintenance Base Yard to address some water quality issues. So once the PBMP is turned over, there is inspection and maintenance requirements. So DOTA is responsible, or ARE is responsible to inspect the PBMPs annually and maintain as needed. And then these records have to be maintained for 5 years per the Honolulu Small MS4 permit. And so since DOH ensures that the DOT is following through this requirement of PBMP inspection and maintenance, it would be very helpful for AirEE to know and understand the exact maintenance that's required for PBMPs. And that's why providing an O&M plan to AirEE during the installation or prior to installation is extremely important and is something that we really encourage contractors to keep doing. Sorry, I skipped the slide. So basically we are now moving into, so this is our current process, and now we're going to talk about how what we're thinking to change and how we're going to do the upcoming revisions. So the goals.
Can you hear me, Vijaya?
Yes.
I just want to let everybody know we have come up on 45 minutes right now, but I would certainly encourage everybody to hang on. I think a lot of this information that Vijaya is presenting is very important. So if you can, please do. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Sorry, everyone, that I'm going over. I'll try to wrap this up as soon as I can. So the goals are to provide a clear guidance to the designers to provide, to implement PBMPs and LID, We want to revisit the criteria. We want to kind of standardize the LID PBMPs that can be used. Develop a process for waivers and variants from LID PBMPs, and then update the manuals, which are both the permanent BMP manual and the O&M manuals. So some of the challenges we have are very similar to the challenges that the other MS4 permittees have mentioned in the previous presentations. Basically, we are implementing LID, we are implementing PBMPs. It's just we need to establish a clear and consistent approach to ensure that LID implementation is assessed on every single project, and that the designers are kind of thinking outside the box to see if LIDs can be implemented on small projects. We want to streamline the feasibility of implementation, and then we want to develop like a documented process for waivers. One of the key things that we want to really look at during these updates is to look at the FAA regulations that regulate vegetation and water features. Basically, FAA has regulations and guidelines that limit and or prohibit certain types of vegetation, or limit the height of the vegetation, limit water ponding in certain areas, which are like on airfield and near airfield areas, and then they have limitations on obstructions that are on airfield and near airfield areas. So we want to take all of these criteria right now and streamline the process, so then when we do develop the new guidance manual, it will have all of these FAA regulations related to the stormwater management and design and maintenance, as well as FAA has very strict guidelines related to wildlife hazard management considerations. Bird strikes is a huge issue at the airports, and so we want to make sure that that is being addressed as well. So we want to ensure that there is no vegetation attractants or water attractants to the wildlife. That therefore the new guidance will have very clear process on what needs to be avoided in which areas. So as I mentioned before, we are going to discuss waivers. We're going to develop a process, a documented process to grant waivers. And then we're going to streamline when a variance can be granted. So it can be due to various reasons. It can be due to safe zones that I just talked about on airfield and near airfield zones. It can be due to maintenance of PBMPs near those zones. It can be due to infiltration feasibility. It can be due to contaminated media. So we want to streamline that process. The other document, the Stormwater PBMP manual, which basically gives us the meat of our whole how to select our PBMPs. We want to include the additional applicability factors that we just talked about: treatment area, physical restrictions, infiltration feasibility. We want to consider including depth of groundwater, since most of our airports are really close to the water. We also want to reevaluate again to make sure that FAA regulations are included and are consistent. And then we want to ensure that the maintenance considerations are included in there as well. So for O&M, we want to make sure that the O&M manual has fact sheets for additional PBMPs, such as dry wells and detention basins. Then we want to streamline the inspection maintenance forms so they're more user-friendly for everyone using them. So here's essentially a summary of what you can look to the upcoming revisions. Basically, you can look to see that you'll find that we will revise the definitions of key terms and probably include a glossary. We will emphasize that LID PBMPs have to be implemented per the Honolulu permit requirements. We'll try to provide a consistent approach on how you can do that. We'll include all the restrictions related to FAA and wildlife hazardous, and provide options and exemptions for specific areas in the airports, for different airports. We'll incorporate a waiver and a variance for LID implementation, like a documented process for that. And we want to reevaluate cost analysis alternatives in long-term O&M when we select and consider PBMPs. And we will definitely update all the documents, including SWAMP Section D and Permanent BMP Manual and O&M Manual. So the schedule for these revisions is tentatively, right now it's under development. We are working with AirE and we are in the process of updating them. And then The schedule or the anticipated completion date is early 2021, and then we'll keep you posted. So the last topic is the upcoming revisions to the asset management system. This is our current asset management system. This is Enviance and Wings. So we use Enviance to collect, that's our interface to collect all our inspection, work order, maintenance, report generation, and we use Wings for our GIS. And our new asset management system, VEOCI, that Brian talked about, we're gonna basically use it to transition from manual to electronic forms. We want to integrate the GIS so it's in the background, and we want to make sure that we have our analytical metrics, our dashboards, compliance dashboards, and our key performance indicators on our dashboards all displayed, so we can make sure that we're complying with the permit requirements and we are tracking everything that we need to do. With that, I just want to make sure that you all understand, while I may have talked about Honolulu and Maui, the requirements apply statewide. This is the website that you can go to look at the requirements. And these are the documents. The current process is still under operation, so we will be implementing the same thing. And then if and when in early 2021, when we roll out these new regulations, there will be a training, and we will probably reach out to all the designers and contractors, so the state project engineers and CMs. With that, thank you so much for sitting through the extra 5 minutes. I really appreciate it. And I don't know if we have time for questions. John, I will give it back to you.
Thank you, Vijaya, and thank you, Brian, for the presentations. They were great. Have really just a question about VEOCI. Does that mean the state accepts a drawing and confirms completion of the design phase for payment? I don't think that can be established right now. That is something that is under development. And I think once it rolls out, we'd be able to answer that question. Yeah, and any questions you can send to Stacy Paquette directly. Everyone should have her email. And that's really it. I do appreciate everybody that's attended the conference. I appreciate you guys hanging in here. And this really pretty much concludes the sessions for the day. Mahalo very much. Thank you, guys. And that's it. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Vijaya. Thank you, everybody, for attending.